Well, good morning. Glad you're with us this morning as we're actually going to wind up our study through the book of Esther this morning. We've been in Esther for 6 months, so we are going to wind it up this morning. Glad you could be here. Let's open up in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you right now. Lord, I just pray that you would be with us as we open your word. God, I thank you for this study. I thank you for what it's taught me. God, I pray that you would be with those that are listening right now. God, you know the requests that are on their heart. Lord, I just lift them up to you. God, we just thank you, praise you, and honor you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Well, all right, last week we looked at this unusual request by Esther for another day. As we've journeyed through this book of Esther, we've seen a couple of things. First of all, we started Esther with a banquet. Do you know what we're going to end with? Another banquet, another feast. And you've got all these other feasts thrown in the middle. I wrote this down. I want you to think about this for a second. You've got 3 main people in the book of Esther. You've got Queen Esther, who is a very shrewd, talented, smart. Basically Esther outsmarts every man in this book. She is compassionate, and that's Esther. Then you get Mordecai. Poor Mordecai. You just think that he's not going to make it. In fact, he comes within an eyelash of being killed by Haman. But eventually Mordecai ended up being number 2 in the kingdom. In fact, look at how he's dressed. Chapter 8, verse 15 says, Mordecai went out of the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. Here's a man that started out in a sackcloth at Haman's edict. So Mordecai came a long way. Then we got the king, King Ahasuerus. It's hard to describe this guy in the book of Esther for the simple fact is he really don't do much. If I'm being honest with you, he don't even act like a king. He does a good job with his one decision that he actually made. You go through the book of Esther, he literally makes one decision. One. And God uses that decision to save the Jews. Think about it. It wasn't his idea to kill the Jews. It wasn't his idea to say. He literally has one idea through this whole thing. When you look at him also, he never really rules the kingdom. He never really does. He lets Haman do it. He's letting Mordecai do it. And when we get to chapter 10, at the end of chapter 9 and verse 10, it looks like Esther's doing it. He has been defeated by the Greeks. He wants to go back to Greece. His coffers are empty. He needs money. He loves his wife, Esther. Absolutely adores her. He gives her anything she wants. He treated Vashti horribly. But you have this king that really doesn't act like a king, and guess what's going to happen? He's eventually going to get assassinated. Well, then we get to Haman, who's the bad guy. Haman was, once again, can't understate this enough. He was an Amalekite, enemy of the Jews. He had a plan to kill, destroy, annihilate men, women, and children of the Jews. He had a plan. He wanted to manipulate the king. He lied to get what he wants. He tried to wipe out an entire race of people, the Jewish race. But he fails. But do you know what he ultimately wanted? I believe was to be king. Because if we go back and look, he wanted to dress like a king, act like a king, and be kingly. So you have those characters. Now we're going to end. We're going to pick up right where we left off last week. Now remember, I told you Esther asks for one more day of destruction, and we looked at that. And I won't go back through it, but we looked at that last week. And as we pick up in verse 14, so the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. Now, once again, when we get to verse 14, what you have here is the city Jews. I told you this last week. You're going to see from the rest of chapter 9 that you can almost divide the city Jews and the country Jews. The city Jews get another day of fighting, basically. They get another day. The country Jews from the other 126 provinces, they're done. But the other Jews have this other day that they're fighting. They are now fighting again. And it says here, it says the king commanded this to be done. So he gives Esther whatever. Look, why stop now? He's done give her everything she ever wanted. He gives her another day. This decree was issued Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons, just like she wanted. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together on the 14th day of the month and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand on their plunder. So, think about this for a second. This is absolutely amazing to me. Absolutely amazing. The king agrees to give Esther another day. He gives her what she wants. You have another 300 men killed in Shushan. If you remember last week, I said maybe Esther and Mordecai knew of more people that were going to die. Maybe this was it. That brings the total to 800 people in Shushan or Susa that have been killed. 800 men. The Jews killed 800 of their enemies. Now look, I think it's kind of surprising that many people died in Shushan. I really do. Apparently there was 800 men that were loyal to Haman. Or they were descendants of Amalekites. But here's the thing. Think about what's going on in Shushan or Susa. The people know that they got a king that has sided with the Jews. The queen is a Jew, and the number 2 man in the kingdom, Mordecai, is a Jew. Now, you've got all this going on right here. This is actually surprising to me that many men in Shushan, knowing all this, still attacked the Jews. But they did. Well, what you have is you have these 800 men in Shushan dying. What you see in the Bible is this. The remainder, verse 15 says, and the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay a hand or plunder. Verse 16, the remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives. Once again, they were not allowed to go and fight. They couldn't go out and start nothing. They were only allowed to defend themselves. Had to rest from their enemies and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the month, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So on these 2 days, you have the city Jews killed 800 men in Shushan. All the rest of the provinces, all the 126, 75,000 men died in 1 day here. 802 days here. That averages out to be about 600 men per province. The Jews, think about this, the Jews go a year of thinking that they're going to be destroyed. They go a year of anxiety, of mental stress. And on the day they were to be destroyed, they were victorious, and they worshiped. Look what it says. And it is a day of feasting and gladness. Now, here's the thing about it. As they were united in victory, they divided in celebration. It depended on whether you lived in the city or the country. Look in verse 18. But the Jews who were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day, as well as on the 14th day. And on the 15th of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns, and there's your country Jews, celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. Now what you have here is this. This is why the festival of Purim is observed on 2 different days. The 14th day in the country, but the Jews in Shushan celebrated on the 15th. So you've got these 2 different days of celebration. In fact, if you want to know what goes on now, the Jews fast on the 13th. That's the date of Haman's edict was issued. They go to the synagogue, they hear the book of Esther read, and when they hear Haman's name, they will boo. They will just boo. They say Haman and they just boo. And then there's children, and they bring these noise makers, and when they hear Haman's name, they just beat on these noise makers. Then they cheer for Mordecai. They cheer for Esther. Now, the 14th, the Jews go back to the synagogue where the book of Esther is read again. The congregation prays, and then the passage of Moses and the Amalekites is read. Then they go home and have a holiday meal. And they swap gifts and they celebrate. And the celebration continues the next day when they give food and gifts to the poor. Now that's what goes on now, this Feast of Purim. Now, verse 20. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far who were in all the province of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy from them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make the days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. Now, what you have here is this. Mordecai sends this letter. I want to tell you, some people, when it says, and Mordecai wrote these things, some people will take this as Mordecai wrote the book of Esther. I don't believe that. I believe it's him writing this letter. I believe it's just him writing this letter. But he sends this letter to the Jews and orders both days to be observed. He comes and he says, all right, we both days to be observed. Now, when we look in verse, when we continue to reading here. So the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them. So the Jews accept it. Verse 24, because Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them and cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and he and his sons on the gallows. So they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter and what had happened to them, the Jews established and imposed upon themselves and their descendants and all who would join him, that without fail that they should celebrate these 2 days every year according to the written instructions and according to the prescribed time, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, that these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. Now, We read this about the Jews accepting this. Did you notice something there? Did you notice how important it was for them to keep going, that they would tell their children about this? Let me read on and finish this. Verse 29, Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai, the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews to 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with the words of peace and truth to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Now let me just tell you this. Purim is the Hebrew word for pur. Hebrew plural word for pur. Now, in verse 29, you have Esther and Mordecai. They write this second letter. Now, you have a letter from Mordecai. You have this second letter for Esther and Mordecai. Why the second letter? Because some say the Jews didn't want to change their original day, so it took a letter from the queen and the nation's number 2 to keep the peace among the Jews. They were beginning to bicker, argue, fuss, and fight about the day that Purim was being celebrated. So Queen Esther and Mordecai wrote this letter, and they send it out to keep the... In fact, look what it says. Look what it says. It's there to keep peace. Excuse me. The second letter is to keep peace among the Jews. In fact, it is described as words of peace and truth. Did you see that? It's described as words of peace and truth. Look in verse 30. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews to 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth. Now, this is why some of them say that there was a division among the Jews and they were beginning to fight and argue about the dates. Well, look what else happens. These letters was written in the book. What book? The book of the Medes and the Persians. Now you get to chapter 10 and you get this. It says, And King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. The king comes and he taxes everybody. He does what government do. He's the government. He's concerned about money. He needs to fill his coffers so he can take another crack at the Greeks. He reverses everything of what he did in chapter 2, verse 18, where he gives a tax break. He taxes everybody. Now all that, verse 2, Now all the acts of his power and his might and the account of the greatness of Mordecai to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and was great among the Jews, and well received by the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his country. Mordecai, who seeks the good of the people, speaks peace and truth to them. As the king's chief officer, the Jews experienced exactly the opposite of what they had experienced under Haman. Now, let me just go ahead and tell you this. Mordecai does not hold on to this office long, because world history tells us that another man holds this office in 465 BC. You see, King Xerxes was assassinated, and no further details are given to us about Esther or Mordecai. So basically, Mordecai keeps this office for about 8 years, according to world history. What Mordecai did for less than 8 years for the Jews, what did he do? What did he do, man? He spoke peace and truth. Listen to what I'm telling you here. What he did for less than 8 years, Jesus does for us for all of eternity. Let me just show you something real quick. Chapter 8, verse 15. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel, with a great crown of gold, a garment of white. Who does that sound like? Who does that sound like that's got a crown of gold and royal robes and speaks truth and speaks peace? Who do you think that's a picture of? Well, thank you for joining us this morning. Glad you was with us. I hope you've enjoyed this study of Esther. I want to invite you back next week. God bless you. Have a good week.